I've learned this much. Take what you can, when you can. Then you've learned nothing.
Those are some bold words for a chap who's had about 80% of his sword choreography lifted directly from another movie, Justin. On my last couple of episodes, I have said things like, IMDb lists the fight director of X movie as Y person, and I've had people come to me and say, actually, that is not correct. It is not that Belgian, it is a different Belgian entirely. IMDb trivia, it turns out, is the same way. Generally accurate, but not entirely accurate, and so it is in this case. I absolutely love The Secret of NIMH. I adored it as a child, and now that I've watched it again recently as an adult, it still holds up, it's still really good. And it apparently provided some subconscious inspiration for my novel writing, which we'll get to in a minute. Because on this channel we like to talk about film combat, and to misquote Taylor Swift, I think I've seen these moves before. And if you've been around for the last few fight analyses, you've seen a few of them too. This video is sponsored by me and my book, Just Stab Me Now, for reasons which will become readily apparent in a couple of minutes. I'm Jill Bearup, I'm an actor combatant, which is someone who can pretend to fight people on stage without actually hurting them, and the plot of The Secret of NIMH goeth thusly. This is Mrs. Brisby. She's a widowed field mouse with a bunch of kids, and one of them is sick and not allowed to go outside until he recovers, which is a problem because her house is in the middle of a field and the farmer is about to plough. So she goes to the rats who live in the rosebush to ask for help from Nicodemus. The rats, like her late husband, are really smart because they were experimented on at NIMH. Nicodemus says, yes, we loved Jonathan. Here is a magical amulet, and yes, we will move your house. Jenner, the rat, on the other hand, wants Nicodemus dead and also wants the amulet, so he says, yes, we'll move your house. After all, accidents can happen. Then there are some shenanigans where Mrs. Brisby drugs the farmer's cat so it can't interfere with the house moving, and then she gets caught by the farmer's kid. She overhears that the rosebush where the rats live is going to be bulldozed, which does make sense because, I mean, it glows at night. If I were the farmer, I would be concerned about that too. And the rats start to move her house, but in the middle of it, Jenner performs some sabotage and gets Nicodemus killed, and then tries to kill Mrs. Brisby to steal the amulet, both of which even his sidekick thinks are a bit much. Justin, the captain of the guard, has to sword fight Jenner. Justin wins, but Jenner isn't quite dead, and eventually the dying sidekick kills Jenner. But then the house starts sinking with the kids inside. Oh no. Luckily, the magical amulet and the power of courage of the heart saves the day. All's well that ends well. The rats go off somewhere else, and Mrs. Brisby and the kids are safe in the house, regardless of who is ploughing what field. The end. I would like to tell you that as a child, I adored Justin, and so probably that is why, when I watched this film again, for the first time in about 20 years, I looked at Justin and I thought, oh, Robin, and oh, Leo. I mean, he's even a captain. This isn't the only childhood memory I have recently unlocked on characters from whom Leo probably took inspiration, but that's another video. Before I rewatched it, I was under the impression that Justin and Mrs. Brisby totally having a moment was just a product of my fevered childhood imagination.
Who may I ask?
Oh, yes, she can be trusted. This is no stranger. My dear, may I present Justin, the captain of the guard. Justin, Mrs. Brisby.
Not Mrs. Jonathan Brisby.
Yes, the same.
It is an honor and a privilege, my lady.
If we could dispense with the formalities.
How beautiful.
Ma'am?
The lights. They're quite lovely.
But no, having watched it again as a grown-up, there's definitely flirting happening there. I'm not quite sure how to feel about that, but I'm sure that fanfiction.net knows how to feel about that. Rosamund, the main character in the fantasy sections of Just Stab Me Now, is not unlike Mrs. Brisby. So possibly Caroline, who is writing Rosamund, also really enjoyed The Secret of NIMH as a child. Who knows? Though it has to be said, Just Stab Me Now does not end with Rosie getting magic powers, but there was also that joke that I made at the end of the very first episode. Do I have magic powers? Not currently. Yeah, that's weird. This is why this video is sponsored by me and Just Stab Me Now. Not just because I enjoy sponsoring my own videos, though I do, but because if you're going to take inspiration from a movie, it should at least be a good movie. And speaking of taking inspiration from movies, let's talk about this sword fight. Today, mostly not in a what is the actual choreography kind of way, but in a where did these moves come from kind of way. Because you see, IMDb trivia insists that, quote, the staging of the climactic sword fight between Justin and Jenner was largely taken from the Errol Flynn-Basil Rathbone duel in The Adventures of Robin Hood, 1938. Some choreography, including the villain getting stabbed in the stomach, was literally copied by the animators. Other moments were inspired by fight scenes in The Vikings, 1958. Yes, we're going to take a look at this claim because it is stretching the truth somewhat. Now, in animation, it's not exactly unknown for animators to take things from other places and rotoscope them to make something else. Disney is quite well known for doing it. For example, they took from their own Snow White and the Aristocats for the animated version that they made of Robin Hood. But an animation studio reusing its own animation is not exactly what's happening here. What's happening instead is that we are basically rotoscoping live action fights with our own characters. As I said, the quote largely from The Adventures of Robin Hood is stretching the truth to breaking point because largely this fight is from the Vikings, and I'm gonna prove it. To be strictly fair though, we're not just ripping this entire scene directly from the Vikings. There is an entire section at the start where Jenner is chasing Mrs. Brisby and then Justin is trying to defend her with a stick before he gets his sword, which doesn't come from the Vikings, or at least not from this particular sword fight. But after Sullivan, the baddie's sidekick who's now totally not on board with the being a baddie thing, throws Justin his sword, and Jenner kills him for doing that, we are on. And we are starting in the second phrase of this fight in the Vikings. In the Vikings fight, we're up high, and obviously this snarly chap with the glass eye is the baddie. We largely replicate the geography of the Vikings fight, just in mud and rocks, because obviously they are rat-sized. And as in the Vikings fight, this terrain problem adds a lot of visual interest. Unlike something like the Captain Blood fight, where there is a lot of fighting in straight lines, in this one we are up, down, under, over, around the houses, and doing everything we can to make it as interesting as possible in a 360-degree kind of way.
Justin! My sword!
Let's go. As you can see, some moves were inspired by the Vikings doesn't really cover it. It's move for move and shot for shot without me having to do any editing at all, right up to the point where Justin starts to talk.
It was you. You did it.
My gosh, he's put it together. So we have an extended part here which I have sped up to 500% so we can compress it down until we get back to ripping off their choreography again. Well, not this one shot. In this section I have done a little bit of editing, first to remove a few frames from the ends of shots in the Vikings because the Secret of NIMH fight is a little bit faster, and this part where Justin and the Viking chap do some overhead cuts. The Viking chap actually does a few more, but we only have one from Justin. And then after that we even have, given an extra insert shot of Jenner looking menacing, Mrs. Brisby acting as purple dress lady.
What you can, when you can.
Then you've learned nothing.
And this is the point where the Secret of NIMH and the Vikings diverge. And we get The Adventures of Robin Hood instead. First, Robin / Justin kicking the table / big bit of wood right back at Guy of Gisborne / Jenner, and then the ending stab from Robin Hood as well. And both of these are inverted, they're backwards, as it were. Now, unlike in The Adventures of Robin Hood, this stab does not immediately kill Jenner, and so there are some additional shenanigans. But I think the claim that the choreography is largely taken from The Adventures of Robin Hood with some moments from the Vikings is a little bit backwards. Wouldn't you say? Hopefully you can't get sued for redrawing scenes from movies from the 50s and 30s into your 80s animated movie. Though if you can, there's probably a statute of limitations on that. Surely. And after all, if you're going to steal, steal from the best. The fight in the Vikings works perfectly for The Secret of NIMH. It's environmentally interesting, it uses the same kind of swords, it has the same kind of dynamic between the hero and the villain. All in all, just really good. I hope you enjoyed this feeling of vague nostalgic familiarity. We will be back next time with a more comprehensive fight analysis of quite a different movie. There will be men, manly men, men in tights, tight tights. Buy my book and see you soon.